Hello and welcome into the 24/7 Sports Football Recruiting Podcast. I'm Cooper Petagna. That's Andrew Ivins. Drew, we got a lot to talk about today. We got a 5-star commitment coming up in the next hour or so. But Drew, the real question is, are we Eli Holstein believers? Is that where this podcast is going? You and I talking about old Eli Holstein was back and forth in the rankings, Zachary, Louisiana. There's a lot of conversation, Drew. If you go back to it, some people down in the bayou were talking about, hey, what about this Eli Holstein kid? He was the same class as Arch Manning. Maybe we're not there yet. But Drew's or Eli Holstein, what do you think, man?
He, I think, has been one of the low-key stories of the college football season, right? He left Alabama. The feedback I got, I think you heard similar things, was not good. Surfaces at Pittsburgh, and he's got the Panthers 3-0 playing in new Cade Bell's offensive system. This is a guy that wasn't even the starter, I think, entering spring practices, and now he has engineered 2 comeback wins. I'm all in on Eli Holstein. Coop, I wrote on CBSSports.com a re-ranking of the class of 2023 quarterbacks. Eli Holstein checking in at number 7. So check that out at CBSSports.com.
Nice plug there. Shameless plug. You can find Andrew's article every Wednesday on CBSSports.com, like he just said. And we got a great show. But before we can go further into the show today, Drew, we do have a commitment right here on this channel, 24/7 Sports YouTube channel. Make sure to like and subscribe as well. 5-star Jerome Myles from Corner Canyon High School in Utah. He comes off the board today. Andrew, maybe what you would categorize as a little bit of a darling behind the scenes of the 24/7 sports scouting community. We got USC, we got Texas A&M, we got Utah. They all have hats on the table. Break it down for us, man. You're the DOS. You love this kid. We kind of took a shot on him early. I think all returns since then have been pretty positive.
Yeah, we love the idea of Jerome Myles, and we are coming off a 2024 recruiting cycle where it was the year of the wide receiver. And with this 2025 group, we were looking for some pass catchers to emerge. As we went back and we went through everything we saw this offseason, went back into the junior seasons, Jerome Myles is a name that kept coming up. It was the size and the speed. The issue was he was hurt as a junior. So we kind of rolled the dice, move him up into our top 32, right? Give him that 5-star designation. And it pays off in a big way, right? Jerome Myles against IMG Academy, 3 touchdown catches. The issue is, Cooper, he gets hurt week 3, and he is out for the rest of the season. So we love Jerome Myles, what he can be. The unfortunate thing is he has dealt with some injuries. That being said, this is a kid that battled back as an 11th grader after injuring his ankle, came back for the playoffs, and came up big for his squad, helping them win a state title there in Utah. So we like him, would like to see maybe some more on-field context, but someone's getting a good one, right? This guy was number 3 on my annual freaks list.
USC favored on the crystal ball. Here's USC's current receiver room as it stands right now. Zachariah Branch, Kyron Hudson, Kyle Ford, Jacoby Lane, Deuce Robinson, Mekhi Lemon, Jay Fair comes over from Auburn as well. Drew, they're loaded, but those first couple names that I mentioned, those first 6 names, those are all guys out of the West Coast footprint, right? USC has never had an issue being able to attract top-tier talent at the receiver position. We'll see what happens with Jerome Myles, but certainly one of the more dynamic kids in this class at the receiver position. Drew, here's a question for you, a little bit off script. In your mind, where does Jerome Myles kind of fit if you were to put him in that conversation just a year ago for what we're calling a generational receiver class?
Yeah, I think he's more of round 2 when you compare him to the likes of Jeremiah Smith, Cam Coleman, Ryan Wingo, Ryan Williams. You know, the one that he's kind of the most similar to, I think, is Ryan Wingo, given, again, that size-speed combo. Jerome Myles, fastest man in Utah history, 10.36 in the 100-meter dash, and he did that in his first year running track. It's not like this kid has been lining it up and putting on the spikes since he was a youngster. He just tried it out. And I think Ryan Williams is kind of where the conversation would begin. All right, is it Ryan Wingo, Jerome Myles? I think he's somewhere in that group. Coop, you mentioned USC's wide receiver room. Everything is pointing towards them. Me and you have kind of tossed this out behind the scenes. I don't know who has the top wide receiver room in all of college football right now, but I'm keeping my eye on the Trojans this weekend when they travel to Michigan. Obviously, the Wolverines have Will Johnson there in the secondary. You know, he can shade one side of the field, But man, those 6 wide receivers you mentioned, I love this group. Against LSU, that group produced 10 explosive plays and 7 contested catches. That is a unique blend of different skill sets kind of all coming together. I love it. And what's crazy, Cooper, USC lost 2 receivers to the NFL draft. And it feels like this wide receiver room is just full of budding stars. It might be better than what it was last season there in LA with Caleb Williams throwing it around.
Big game this weekend in Ann Arbor at the Big House, and you kind of wonder what the contrast of styles is going to look like. USC, Michigan, we've been talking about that all offseason. USC, it's early, but the defense has showed up under new defensive coordinator D'Anton Lynn. Miller Moss also playing well as of now. Guys, just a reminder, like I said, 2 o'clock Eastern time, you can find Jerome Myles' announcement coming up right here on the 24/7 Sports YouTube channel. Make sure to stick around at the top of the hour. Going to be some really good news for somebody out there who's got a hat on the table. All right, Drew, back to our recruiting roots. The most intriguing recruitment left on the board, and I think this is kind of an interesting question because what are we, like 3 months away from early National Signing Day? It just seems to be one of those things that has kind of faded into the background a little bit, and all of a sudden you look up and it's a collision course in December. But is there one recruitment top of mind for you that you're like, hey, you know what, this is pretty interesting to kind of see how this one's going to play out?
Coop, I think I'm trying to do some math in my head, 10 weeks away from the early signing period. Remember, it's as early as ever, that first week of December. I mean, it's going to be right before the college football playoff. This is what some people in the college coaching community wanted. This is what the NCAA thought everyone wanted. And I don't think we're talking about it enough, right? Just the race to signing day. Remember, there's not going to be these huge visit weekends when we get into December. There's not going to be your favorite school hosting 4 or 5 targets right before they sign on the dotted line. If you're going to bring someone in for an official visit, you had to do it in the summer or you're doing it here during the season. And I don't know about you, Coop, I've heard some mixed reviews kind of from different college contacts about what it's like trying to host these kids on a game day weekend. It's not like you're rolling out the red carpet, you're having all these meals. I mean, the coaches are locked in, right? They're trying to win football games. So an interesting twist there. The guy that I'm keeping my eye on, and it's the top uncommitted 5-star prospect, Elijah Griffin, defensive lineman out of Savannah, Georgia. Cooper, I write him down for a number of reasons here. Top 3 is Georgia, USC, Miami. Kirby Smart normally gets what Kirby Smart wants, and he normally gets what he wants in his backyard. We've long viewed Elijah Griffin as a Georgia lean, but he hasn't picked the Bulldogs yet. So I think that's an interesting angle. And then USC's push into the Peach State. We always bring it up on this show. What are they doing trying to go after all these point of attack players in SEC country? We mentioned it a few weeks ago. They get Cameron Fountain. He's playing as a true freshman. We'll see what he does in Ann Arbor this weekend. And then the other thing, Cooper, Miami. Elijah Griffin was expected to be in Coral Gables this past week for an unofficial visit. That didn't end up happening. I think some travel issues kind of fell through. But Miami, they're looking like they're going to have a magical season. And you think about Mario Cristobal. Cooper, you worked for him. Mario Cristobal eats, breathes, sleeps recruiting. I think he's going to look to take advantage of this season that they're going to have, especially with Florida State and Florida down. And when you look at the available targets, who's still out there? Elijah Griffin, to me, is the one where Mario Cristobal has to be chomping at the bit because he knows he's a difference maker in the middle. 10 tackles for loss, 4 sacks in 4 games for Elijah Griffin. He's one where I want to know what's going to happen.
Kind of reminds me a little bit of DJ Hicks, and he's had a super quiet recruitment for a top 10 player in the country. We haven't spent a whole lot of time really talking about Elijah Griffin. I think a lot of people think it's more of a foregone conclusion that he's going to end up in Athens as a Bulldog under Kirby Smart, and you're probably right to think so. We'll see what happens with him. Justice Terry's still out there, hadn't made a decision yet as well. So Georgia, like you said, Drew, typically get what they want, but I'm going to stick with the Miami theme here. What about DJ Pickett? You and I have gone back and forth on DJ Pickett, the player, but let's just say that this guy fits the bill of a top 32 player in the country. We got him ranked inside the top 10. Is he a corner? He's a safety. Right now, in my mind, it really doesn't matter. I love the size. I love the height, weight, speed. I love the versatility on the back end as well. This is a really intriguing kid, Drew, but if you follow the breadcrumbs, this is a guy that picked LSU over Miami just a few short weeks ago. Miami, they're still in it. DJ Pickett, in terms of the exposure to Miami, he was at that Florida game where Miami trounced the Gators in Gainesville. I think he got to see him last week against Florida A&M as well. It seems like Miami is kind of trending in the right direction here. The reason I bring up DJ Pickett is because LSU, in a bad way, is hurting for these type of bodies and these type of athletes in their secondary. Corey Raymond has done a really good job. Cade Phillips, we've talked about on this show. Aiden Anding is another guy that we like a lot. They're starting to kind of get back to that standard of what they had in that LSU third level defensive back DBU type of secondary. Drew, DJ Pickett is the guy that they used to bring in year over year over year. The first 2 years of Brian Kelly's tenure, they have not been able to land a guy like DJ Pickett. So sure, it would be a huge plus for Miami, where where you're looking at a program that would only get stronger in the secondary. But LSU, they need this dude, so they got to find a way to keep him in the boat. I think this is going to be one of the more interesting ones to kind of see play out over the next 2.5 months.
Well, Miami has some playing time available in the secondary as well. I think that's one of the biggest question marks for the Hurricanes. Those perimeter corners, those defenders, they're probably looking to upgrade there. DJ Pickett is someone that they could pitch early playing time to. Cooper, let me ask you this. Again, you've been in the war room with Mario Cristobal. You know the type of individual he is. You think if he had his choice, would it be DJ Pickett or would it be Elijah Griffin, who they could potentially pair with another former 5-star prospect in Justin Scott, who is getting some run here as a true freshman for the Hurricanes?
I think positionally, I would tell you it would be Elijah Griffin. I think from a program, 30,000 feet standpoint, I mean, this is a great way to kind of say, okay, we've arrived year 3 of Mario Cristobal. And what I mean by that is he's not going to Florida, he's not going to Florida State, and then you got to beat out an aggressive team like LSU, where the need is pretty excessive for the Tigers in their secondary. So, yeah, I would say more perceptionally, DJ Pickett says more about Miami. He'd love both, don't get me wrong, but I think DJ Pickett would be the one right now he's probably sinking his teeth into, where he knows he's got a little bit of an opening there.
All right, my second intriguing recruitment that I'm following, Julian Lewis, the longtime USC quarterback commit. Really good start to his senior campaign, Cooper. It actually should be his junior campaign. Remember, he reclassified from 2026 to 2025. In 5 games, he's completed 78.9% of his passes for just over 1,200 yards, 20 touchdowns to go in against 2 INTs. His team is 5-0. He's now 30-3 as a starting quarterback in one of Georgia's highest classifications. I bring up Julian Lewis here because I have a scenario for you. I'm calling this the quarterback Armageddon, Cooper. You ready? Let me outline this for you. Julian Lewis has been linked to Indiana. Let's say he flips to the Hoosiers, who, by the way, are 3-0. What does that mean for Hassan Longstreet, who is committed to Texas A&M? You know, USC has sniffed around there, kicked the tires. What if the Trojans were to pivot to Hassan Longstreet? What does that do for the Aggies? Could they then pivot to Alabama commit Keelan Russell, who they were in on? He, too, is off to an excellent start to his senior season. Or would it be Texas commit KJ Lacey? Then you have Auburn linked to Deuce Knight, the Notre Dame commit. They, too, could kind of go back to KJ Lacey. What would the Longhorns do? I think they would go for Keelan Russell. And then Notre Dame, let's say they lose Deuce Knight. You got Auburn, or you got, North Carolina commit Bryce Baker, Maryland commit Malik Washington. You know, word is Penn State's staff is sniffing around on Malik Washington now that Missouri commit Matt Zollers is out for the year. I don't know. I just think Julian Lewis could be the first domino that falls and potentially creates a chain reaction for these quarterbacks. And, you know, he could very well end up sticking with USC. I think the last intel I kind of heard from Tom Loy a few weeks ago, he thought Julian Lewis was going to play for Lincoln Riley. But then again, Indiana quietly 3-0 right now. Just something to keep an eye on.
I wasn't thinking that far ahead. I need like a Venn diagram to be able to figure that out and keep up with that. But I think you're right. I mean, I think the longer this plays out, maybe the more in favor it plays out for USC in the sweepstakes of Julian Lewis. And I think a lot of USC fans are trying to figure out, where are we with Julian Lewis. Julian Lewis has been one of those guys who's been committed to USC for quite some time, but he's also been shopped. He was linked to Auburn. He's been linked to Indiana. Indiana seems to be the team right now that is the biggest threat to USC. I think the biggest thing that USC has going for Julian Lewis is that Julian Lewis, in my opinion, wants to play on the big stage. And I think the success that USC has had this year, although it's early, with Miller Moss, who's honestly pretty similar to Julian Lewis in some ways, I think that's a little bit more enticing for him. So we'll see what happens there. I think Deuce Knight ultimately ends up at Auburn. I think you bring up one of the more intriguing names that we haven't really talked about publicly, and Bryce Baker. What happens with him? North Carolina, right? I think Notre Dame is going to be in a really interesting spot, maybe to kind of ruffle some feathers with Jaron Kiwa Sakapolatele. If I butcher that name, I apologize. Out at Cal,
it was good. He's been linked. He's been linked to USC as well. And Coop, here's the other thing, right? So what happens with Florida? They don't have a quarterback. What about Ole Miss, right? Ole Miss is going to make a college football playoff run right here. They don't have a quarterback committed. You don't think Lane Kiffin is going to try to use that, big time points, season, Jackson Dart, explosive plays, and like parlay that into a flip at the buzzer?
Yeah, no, I think they will. Ole Miss has been good in terms of what they've been able to do at the buzzer. You mentioned A.J. Maddox was another name that they brought in last year. That room is super deep. Austin Simmons, Walker Howard, whether they've pieced it together through high school or through the transfer portal, they have a lot of intriguing pieces. Drew, let's keep it going here. One other recruitment for me, Andrew Babalola. What happens with him? Auburn, Michigan. We're going to talk a little Michigan hopefully later in this show. This is a huge one for Sharon Moore, right? That offensive line trying to get back to where the standard is for Michigan, and that program being a national championship contender. It starts right there at the point of attack. They need this kid. This is a high academic kid. It was Stanford. It was Michigan. Now it's Auburn that's gotten in there, and it seems like, reading between the tea leaves and brushing up on Tom Loy's latest report, it seems like Auburn's in pretty good shape here. That one would just be kind of odd to me. The on-field, off-field fit at Michigan makes way too much sense for Andrew Babalola. They have to be able to spell that out for him. That one's going to be interesting to watch down the line as well. Drew, anything else on some of the more intriguing recruitments as we inch towards early National Signing Day?
Again, we're under 3 months to go, right? I think we're going to see some movement. Hasn't been high-profile flips here over the past few days, but there's been some under-the-radar ones, and I think that's just a sign of what is to come. The schools that invest in the high school recruiting, they're the ones that are watching the senior tape. We're only going to see more kind of movement when it comes from one player going from one class to another class. So stay tuned, I think, here for the next few months.
All right, more recruiting here. I like this question. I like this topic a lot. Best recruit in the country that we're not talking about enough.
Am I giving you the T-box or you want me to go?
I'll start. You've had the T-box honors the last couple of times. I'm going to start with Brandon Finney. Drew committed to Oregon, and I got to give Hudson Standish his flowers on our scouting team. He's long been a fan of this kid out of the Maryland area. Drew, I think Oregon's got something here with this kid. You think about the length of Brandon Finney, 6'1", 3/4", 180 pounds. He ran 10.85 in the 100 meters, also sub 4.6, a guy that's 34 inches in the vert, an explosive player, two-way athlete, really dynamic on the offensive side of the ball. Drew, the more that I watch his senior tape, I actually think this kid could play closer to the line of scrimmage, really in a nickel safety role. He is a big kid that can roll. He is a long strider. I think he is the type of guy that you want to match up with bigger body receivers and tight ends. He's kind of a little bit of a mismatched defender. You can move around, super versatile, heady kid, Drew. We got him ranked just inside the top 100. I have him really kind of marked as a riser. We've had our eyes on this kid for quite some time. I know the track and field background is legit. He's one of those super, super clean athletes. But, man, Brandon Finney, he's got all my attention right now.
Yeah, he's got a 5.0 perfect PAI score from tracking football. Why is that notable? Ryan Wingo, the freshman receiver at Texas, he too had a 5.0 PAI score. Cooper, I like that one. I'm going to the trenches for my recruit. We're not talking enough about Michael Carroll, Alabama offensive line commit. Cooper, this is a guy who moved into the top 247 back during the summer months when we got some verified data. We've now gotten live exposure to him because he has transferred into IMG Academy. He is the senior I have the biggest grade improvement on out of anyone I've watched so far. Like, we're talking a 3-4 round jump here. I call him a forklift, right? He's got tackle size. He plays guard, extremely effective as a puller. He's going to tattoo a linebacker, athletic enough to climb to the second level, constantly in control of his body. Love him in pass sets with his agility, locks up his assignments, wide base, creates a nice pocket, can get a little high at times, but still leverage-based offensive lineman. I think that comes from his wrestling background. Coop, major riser for me in Michael Carroll. I think he's a guy where if he ends up at Alabama, and I know Miami, some other schools have been sniffing around James Franklin on Penn State's bye week. He flew the helicopter into IMG Academy to see Michael Carroll. I think if he ends up at Alabama, we're talking about a kid who is going to be in the rotation year one. Or is he going to start? I don't know, but he is that ready in my eyes. Physically, he's there. Technically, he's advanced. I think someone's going to get a very, very good player, and it's shaping up to be Alabama right now.
Big old freak. You mentioned Miami as well. I mean, this kid, IMG product, Drew, we've seen it in the past with the guys that they've been pumping out. I mean, you go all the way back to Evan Neal, Francis Mauigoa, really kind of one of the more recent ones, Tyler Booker as well there at Alabama. I like the fact that this kid can play a couple different positions. I think you can make an argument he's the most tackle-ready collegiate offensive lineman in the country. So that's what we think of Michael Carroll. I'm glad you brought that one up. All right, I'm going to shower Auburn with a little bit of love here because God knows they need it. Antonio Coleman, Drew, this guy flip-flop, right? Alabama, Auburn. I think he's committed 4 times between 2 schools. We got to figure out what's between the years. But in terms of on the football field, quick twitch, explosive, heavy hands, this guy's a disruptor. You pair him with Jordan Crawford, the other defensive tackle. There are not a ton of bodies like this coast to coast. That's why you see the profile of Malik Autry continuing to elevate, and a lot of teams like Ohio State still knocking on his door. But I love what Auburn's done there at the defensive line and the point of attack. The other one, Drew, how about Amari Adams? You and I have talked about this. And speaking of Malik Autry, if I was Malik Autry and I was a 5-star and this is the way it works now, I'd be looking over my shoulder at a guy like Amari Adams. Disruptive, long kid, going to play at Clemson. They've done a tremendous job. Nick Eason has not only finding these guys, but developing these guys. Drew, big fan of this kid. Love the motor as well. Still a little bit raw, but 2 to 3 year projection. There is a lot to like about Amari Adams.
Yeah, I got a first-round grade on Amari Adams after watching the early stuff from his senior season. Coop, I'm going to give you another IDL that I really like. DJ Sanders, the Texas commit out of Bellevue there in the Lone Star State. Cooper, I'm going to throw this player comp out there. I don't know how you're going to react. I think he's Kenneth Grant, right? Kenneth Grant in high school, 60 foot in the shot put. DJ Sanders, he went 57 feet this spring, 6'0", 3'0", 325. Wingspan north of 82 inches, arms over 34 inches. Those are the only numbers I've been able to get on DJ Sanders, who's going to be at the All-American Bowl. Just got an invite recently, playing a little bit out of position here as a senior. They kind of use him as a 4 and a 5 and an even and an odd front, but he is light on his feet. Lateral quickness is there, plenty of shed power. I think he is just now figuring it out. He might be the top defensive lineman in Texas. It's a really good pickup for Mike Elko in the Aggies, a name to certainly know, as we start to finalize these rankings. DJ Sanders, again, reminds me of Kenneth Grant, and Michigan was involved with DJ Sanders throughout that recruitment before he picked Texas A&M.
All right, we're on the accelerator here with a 5-star commitment coming up at the top of the hour. Make sure you tune in to 24/7 Sports YouTube channel to watch Jerome Myles make his college decision. Like I said, 2 o'clock Eastern time. Drew, a couple other names that you liked: Olesh, Tay Harris, Dalen Pinson, Michigan, Clemson, Georgia Tech, all represented there. Another guy that I got to give some love to is Zion Grady. Drew, just going through my audit, I've kind of nitpicked this kid for quite some time at Enterprise. I just love the length. I love the motor off the edge. I love the way that he plays the position and gets after the passer. Guys, for everything you need to know in college football recruiting, make sure to check out 247sports.com for wall-to-wall team coverage, recruiting rankings, transfer portal updates as well. All right, Drew, hurry up offense here. We wanted to get to this topic I wanted to make sure that we talked about this, especially if you had to condense it. There's probably a lot of things going wrong with Florida and Billy Napier right now as they try to navigate one of the more difficult schedules in all of college football. They're off to a 1-2 start. It just seems to get worse and worse week by week. Drew, but the time machine, Billy Napier, he was hired November 28th, 2021. If you could go back and say, hey, Billy, don't do that. Maybe don't hire that guy, or maybe we have to pivot here in terms of our recruiting philosophy. Where does this all start for Billy Napier in terms of, hey, there's a fork in the road. Maybe you should have went this direction instead of the other one?
Well, I think if you talk to a Florida fan, they're going to bring up the fact that Billy Napier is believed to be the offensive play caller. So I think a lot of people think the issues stem there. For me, Cooper, I think it's the offensive line. And Florida has 2 full-time O-line coaches, one of the only schools in the country. But from a player development and from a high school recruiting standpoint, and even a transfer portal recruiting standpoint, they continue to miss there. And I've said this in the past in this space. Billy Napier heard him at a coach's clinic back in February. He told a room full of 250 people that he felt like Florida finally had some offensive tackles for the first time in his tenure there in Gainesville. I don't know what tackles he was talking about. Through 3 games, and really the games against the elite defensive lines, what Miami has, what Texas A&M have, and I think both those schools have top 10 D lines in all of college football. Florida has had no answers, and that has created tons of issues for Graham Mertz. It's created issues for DJ Lagway, and it's continued to stall out the offense. So I think the O-line, and what should Billy Napier have done different? Well, maybe don't show up in Gainesville and talk about how that's going to be a strength of the program. Don't come up with the motto, 5 equals 1, the 5 starting offensive linemen equals 1 unit, because we haven't seen that yet. It hasn't come to fruition, Cooper. And when you look at Florida's recruiting class, who knows? I would, if I was a betting man, I don't think Billy Napier is going to be running the show in 2025. But Florida has 0 offensive line commits right now in the class of 2024. And sure, yes, some high school prospects might be looking at the Gators, wondering about the future of Billy Napier. But hey, in the name, image, likeness era, when you have general managers, you have collectives, you're telling me Florida didn't realize, 6 months ago that they need to go get some offensive linemen and get those guys committed, get them, in a situation where they like the compensation that's coming their way. So for me, it's the offensive line. I think you threw out a stat before we hit record, 22 offensive line signees for the Gators. Only one of them has started a game.
14, not as much as 22, but you're right. And I think you and I are on the same page here. I mean, I think the more we dive into why some of these teams are having some of the issues that they're having, maybe unexpectedly, if you look at Florida State or if you look at Florida, pretty similar situations in terms of the offensive line and the lack of offensive line development. That is not really a position you want to get into a standard practice of having to go to the portal to find multiple starters. Ask Colorado about that. These are position groups, and we talked about this with Texas and the success that they've had. They have no transfers at the offensive line. That's the number 1 team in the country, right? You look at Georgia, almost the same thing there as well, right? So that continuity, that ability to identify, evaluate, develop these guys, that's so important. And you mentioned it, Rob Sale, okay, who's been a fixture on Billy Napier's staff for 3 years, 14 players signed between 2 position coaches on the offensive line. So this is a position that they are very heavily invested in. Only one of those players has started a game, and that's Najee Harris, their current starting guard. He started 3 games. The output there is not good enough. Right tackle position, we talked about Brandon Crenshaw-Dixon, Damian George. They haven't been good enough on the right side of the offensive line. So you're getting no output there. The other part of this is, as a play caller, Drew, right? Billy Napier has no separation between himself and the play calling. I listened to his press conference on Sunday or Monday, I believe, and he's talking about, well, the execution needs to be better. Well, how about adapting? How about looking at yourself in the mirror? Because here you are as a scoring offense, 56 in 2022, 57th in 2023. So far in 2024, you're 82nd, okay? And your run average per game has gone from 5.51 to 4.27 to 4.10. The inability to evolve and acquire top-end talent on both sides of the line of scrimmage, and they've done a better job on the defensive line. That's really where it starts. But Drew, I'm watching like a organization renaissance right now through 2 weeks of the season on Sundays with the New Orleans Saints, who had a lot of questions about their offensive line, who had a lot of questions about their personnel, who had a lot of questions about their quarterback. They bring in Clint Kubiak from San Francisco, and they look like one of the more dominant offenses in all of the NFL. The lack of urgency to understand the situation and the amount of leash that you have blows my mind. And this looks like a guy that believes he was going to have 6-7 years to get this thing right. When if you don't win and show proof of concept within those first 3 years, you're out. And he's going to learn that in the next couple of weeks. That, to me, is the most disappointing thing about Billy Napier coaching under Nick Saban, knowing the standard of Alabama year in and year out. And if there's any deviation from that, from a national championship or that type of standard, all of a sudden, you start to preheat the oven a little bit, right? And the stove starts to get a little bit hot. This is Florida we're talking about. This is one of the most prestigious programs in the country and one of the most talent-rich areas of the United States. For them to turn this out, it's embarrassing, quite frankly. And it's extremely disappointing because I had a lot of high hopes in Billy Napier, and I thought he would have understood that, but it all starts at the point of attack. And that would have been my biggest thing, man, is like, from staffing to hiring to personnel, you got to like foam at the mouth, and everything has got to be about this year. You got to get it right this year. You don't have that long. And I think he just was navigating under the lens of, hey, I'm going to have 4 or 5 years to piece this thing together. And that's not really the case.
What's wild, Cooper, is I think whoever steps in and, maybe Billy Napier is still there in 2024. Like, I don't think it's going to take all that long for Florida to win some games. We continue to say this, but they got some really good young parts. Now, they're going to have to play transfer portal defense, but if someone's able to come in, right, and go and get some offensive linemen that are, serviceable at the SEC level, they're set at quarterback with DJ Lagway. You still got Eugene Wilson, right? You got Vernell Brown committed. Those are two dynamic playmakers. I also like the other wide receivers the Gators have committed here in the class of 2025. Joshua Moore, Nashawn Montgomery. I think they've had a really good senior season. Flip it over to the defensive side of the ball. That's where you get really, really excited. Right now, I think Kelby Collins is playing a little out of position as an inside guy, but you got TJ Searcy, Cameron James. Those guys look ahead of schedule. I thought Jaden Robinson, a local linebacker they took a few cycles ago, he looks the part. Jakeem Jackson's injured this year. But there's a lot of pieces to like for whoever steps in. I would not be surprised year 1, year 2, whoever takes over next, they're pushing for that 10-win mark, assuming, that they attack the high school recruiting, and then they go out and they get some difference makers in the transfer portal. And I think Cooper, the fan base is going to be so much behind whoever is next. And I think that's going to increase the budget when it comes to looking for veterans out there on the transfer market.
Interesting couple of weeks ahead for Florida. Drew, you've mentioned this to me when we've talked about Florida. The sooner they do this, the better, just in terms of you got an early signing period. You got to play roster defense. You're going to have to find a way to maybe get that new coach in, if you can, maybe by the second, third week of November. I don't know how you're going to pull that off, but we'll see what happens with Florida.
Real quick, remember, Texas Tech, when they hired Joey McGuire, he was at home games recruiting, right, in like the month of November, and that made the transition very easy. Now, Texas Tech hasn't kind of put it together like I think some people thought they would on the field, but that's always an option. You get an interim, you can hire someone, they can come in and, it couldn't be a sitting head coach elsewhere, but you can get a jump. That guy could get around the current players, evaluate the roster. Hey, what do I want to keep? What do I want to let go? Certainly something to consider.
All right, Drew. Quick look ahead to week 4, things that we're tracking. CJ Bailey, first career start at NC State. They're a 20-point dog at Clemson. That game will be at noon Eastern time on Saturday. TJ Moore, Brian Wesco, 2 guys that you're looking at, hoping to build off of that huge game against Appalachian State with Cade Klubnik, 7 touchdowns.
Yeah, I think the TV is going to be set on this game in the Ivins household. You said it, CJ Bailey, Jeremiah Smith's high school quarterback. This is a guy that has won a ton of games. Cooper, I was watching him live against Louisiana Tech, started off a little slow. I thought he got hot as the game progressed. Ended up eking out a 10-point win for the Wolfpack. They have some issues, but to me, CJ Bailey, I hate throwing around the gamer tag because we kind of always use it, but if he's not thinking too much and he's not afraid to make a mistake, he is ready to go. All right, he can make some high-level throws. He can beat defenses with his legs. I think it's going to be a very, very difficult ask of him to go into Clemson and win that game. But hey, who knows? I don't know what to make of Clemson, right? You know, they get blown out by Georgia. They blow out Appalachian State. I want to see Cade Klubnik here in week 4, game 3. Are they playing the freshman wide receivers? I think that's an underlying kind of storyline. Where is Clemson's offense at? Sammy Brown, I think he's also a name to know. 5-star linebacker. I think they are going to take the training wheels off him, dealing with some injuries in that linebacker room. I have a hunch he might be like that 5-star we're raving about this time next week.
All right, a couple quarterback situations that we're monitoring pretty closely. You got Damon Williams, could get some more burn for Washington, and Jed Fish. They face off against Northwestern. Marcel Reed, Connor Wigman. Drew, this is one of those kind of like undercurrents a little bit. I think we got to keep an eye on this because if Marcel Reed gets the nod here against Bowling Green, goes out, plays well, all of a sudden you're trying to figure out, all right, where does Texas A&M, Mike Elko, Colin Klein go? Who do they turn to? Is it going to be Wigman? Is there going to be Marcel Reed? And do they ride the hot hand? And Marcel Reed did some things on Saturday in Gainesville that, quite honestly, he might be a little bit better of a fit for Colin Klein in that offense. So we'll see what happens there. Brock Glenn, DJU, Florida State. They got Cal at 7 o'clock Eastern time on ESPN on Saturday as well. Drew, a lot of pretty interesting storylines emerging here with some young guys potentially being able to get some run.
I want to ask you about Marcel Reed, right? A guy in your territory, your region. I don't remember much of him from a scouting perspective. I knew he had a high-powered arm, and I knew he was a really good athlete. Are you surprised by what you saw there in Gainesville? I mean, I watched the game live in person, dig into the PFF cut-up, and it's like, whoa, okay, make you miss agility. He can make all of the throws. Ball placement might not be there just yet, but I think if you're a Texas A&M fan, you are rooting for this guy to kind of take over and be the face of that offense.
I think accuracy was always the biggest question mark, not so much pure raw arm talent. I think he had that. We went back and forth. All right, do we keep the 90 on or do we drop him to an 89? And I think ultimately at the end of the day, we felt very confident in terms of the total package physically. He was a little bit narrow in the frame. We knew he was going to have to put on some weight, probably going to take him a year or two before he's going to see significant snaps. Now he's year 2 at Texas A&M, Drew. I mean, he looks pretty comfortable there. And like I said, a guy that you can move around. You got to respect his legs as well. Guy that I think you can grow with a little bit. And I think the margin for error is a little bit larger with a guy like Marcel Reed because of the athleticism and the playmaking ability that he has. So am I surprised? Yeah, a little bit, more so on the timeline rather than the performance. But, you know, credit to Colin Klein and Texas A&M and Mike Elko to get him ready to play. I think that's going to be an interesting one, Drew. I think you and I are going to be more involved in the portal this year. The only reason I bring that up, if it is Marcel Reed and he continues on this trajectory, Connor Wigman, I mean, you talk about a guy that would be the most sought-after portal prospect we've seen in quite some time. That would be a guy generating a lot of noise, just something to keep an eye on. Not saying that's going to happen, right? But kind of storing that in the back of my head.
Let me fire this in here, right? We're talking about young quarterbacks. Hey, Austin Simmons at Ole Miss had a chance to buzz what he has done in mop-up duty so far. Remember, Cooper, he was a double reclass, right? So he's a guy that skipped his last 2 years of high school. We had no idea what to do with him in the rankings. We have never seen that before. Finished as a 3-star. I'm regretting not having a 4th star on it next to his name. From what I saw, right, in that limited action, dude, the ball jumps out of his hands, right? He beat out Walker Howard to be Jackson Dart's backup. I think if something were to happen to Jackson Dart in Ole Miss, right, no one's really talked about this. Quarterbacks get hurt. How many backups have started games this season? I think Austin Simmons is ready to go. Keep that offense humming, right? He's not going to be Jackson Dart level, but I don't think there's going to be some massive drop-off. So he is a name to know just based on what I've seen. My early assessment, Austin Simmons. File that one away for another day.
They love him there in Oxford, too. We'll see what happens. Florida State, obviously, a pretty good example of why it's so important to have a good backup quarterback. We saw that last year when Jordan Travis went down. No disrespect to Brock Glenn. We'll see more of him in the future. Guys, stick around. When this stream ends, we will take you live to our coverage of Jerome Myles' commitment. That will be starting at 2 o'clock Eastern time right here on the 24/7 Sports YouTube channel. We appreciate you joining us, as always. For Andrew Ivins, I'm Cooper Petagna. Have a great rest of your day, and we'll see you next week.